Chapter 4, Garstaon Infant School. We moved from our Oldham home to Garston, Watford, when I was 5 years old, and my mum took me to my first day at school, which was at Garstaon Infant School. I was in the second year of the infants. My mum had arranged for me to walk home with a girl called Vivian, who apparently lived in Coates Way, where we lived. Not that I knew my address, because I didn't. All I knew was we had moved to a place called Garston, so I assumed we lived at Garston Road. When it came to walking home, I had to follow Vivian, but she took me by a way I'd never been before, a completely different way, and across a park to what was the other end of Coates Way. She left me there, and I had no idea where I was. I did not recognise it anywhere. Feeling uneasy about this, I realised I was lost, so I made my way back towards the school and began to ask people where Garston Road was. There was no such place, but I insisted I lived at Garston Road. A man with a red doorbill offered to take me back to school to find out where I lived, so off we went. The school teacher said I lived at Coates Way, where Vivian had taken me, but I said I didn't live there as I couldn't recognise that place. The man took me back to Coates Way, but I couldn't recognise where I lived. He drove from one end of the road to the other. It was quite a long way, with the council estate on one end and private housing at the other end. This was where I lived, 149 Coates Way. I saw my mum in the front garden, so I arrived home after being lost on my first day at school. German teacher. My classroom teacher was a German woman called Miss Kitchener. She spoke with a German accent, and I spoke with a broad Lancashire accent. We did not hit it off, and I was hopeless at reading the flashcards. It seemed as though I was singled out and proved to be a dunce, as I couldn't read the flashcards. Being small, I think I messed about to divert attention from my inability to do class work. One day, when I arrived at school, I found a pair of pumps, they call them plimsolls now, which I later found out belonged to Vivian, on my desk, and I did not like them being there. Feeling rather indignant, I placed them in the rubbish bin. I think I might have asked the teacher, "Please, miss, whose are these pumps?" but was ignored, as she did not understand me, and so in the bin the pumps went. The next day, Vivian's mother came to school, wanting to find out where her plimsolls had gone. The caretaker said he had found them and placed them on this boy's desk. When I was questioned, I was troubled, and Miss Kitchener said that my mum would have to buy a new pair of pumps since I'd thrown them away. I felt this unfair, and really felt picked upon. I know my mum came to school and had an argument about the pumps, and the fact that a German teacher was teaching English. That was only a few years after the war with Germany had ended, which really annoyed my mother. David and the hamster. At that time, my mum had to work late, and it was arranged for me to wait in the classroom after school until my mum came to pick me up. This was shortly after the event with the plimsolls. The class had a pet hamster, and this little creature got all the attention from everyone. I was the one that got no attention, but rather got into trouble. One evening, whilst I was waiting in the classroom for my mum to collect me, the teacher left the classroom for a short while. I went towards the hamster cage and thought to myself, why did this hamster get all the attention? I know what I'm going to do with you. I took the hamster out of the cage and closed the door. I looked at the hamster in its eyes and went over to Vivian's desk and put it inside, shutting the lid quickly, thinking that will pay her back for getting me in trouble with her plimsolls. I sat back in my chair before the teacher returned and went home with my mum as though nothing had happened. The next day I went to school, as quiet as I could and kept out of the way. I waited patiently for the eruptions. Then suddenly, "Oh, miss," screamed Vivian, "the hamster's in my desk." It had weed and messed everywhere through the night. Everyone gathered around the desk to see at the same time. I felt very guilty. One boy tried to suggest the hamster had climbed up the leg of the table and got through the hole drilled at the bottom of the desk for ink to spill out and drain away. A good idea, I thought, so keep on thinking that. Then someone asked, how did he get out of the cage as the door was closed? I was feeling very, very guilty now and wondered if Miss Kitchener was thinking, had I done the deed the night before? I kept quiet, and to this day they do not know how that hamster got there. During this time, my brother was attending the Lee Farm Junior School, the school that I was to attend the next year or so. Congregational Sunday School. My mum used to take me to Sunday school from time to time, and I didn't mind going. One day, about 1958, on the way home from the normal school, I walked past the congregational building, rather a modern building. The vicar had lived in a gypsy-style caravan in the church grounds. The church building was always left open, so we went in after school into the building on the way home. I saw on one occasion some boys took money out of the collection box that was left unlocked. I couldn't understand why there were things left unlocked for boys to steal from. One day after school, I met the vicar when I was looking around the church building and asked him why the building was left open and why the collection box was not locked. His reply puzzled me. He said the church should always be open for people because God was there, and that if people felt they needed to steal the collection, then they must need it badly. He did not feel the box should be locked. I was puzzled and said, but why? The vicar was sure it was the right thing to do. That stayed with me to this day, and people get very angry at me from time to time for not locking up my house. At this same church, I can remember the Easter service. I had no idea what the gospel was, nor did I understand the Easter story. I remember sitting in the pew during the Easter service, listening to how they crucified Jesus, wondering why Jesus didn't come down from the cross. I felt he could have done so, and confounded them Pharisees. But why didn't he do so? I knew the story about his death and resurrection, but didn't know what it meant. I never did find out until 14 years later, when I was 21 years old, when I learned to read the Bible for myself. It was then I learned that Jesus had to die to take away my sins, that he died in my place to set me free from sin, self and death. It was about this time, 1959, that my mum encouraged me to play the piano. My mum's favourite piece of music was Perry Como's Side Saddle, and that was mum's favourite piece of music, which I learned to play. I had music lessons with a Miss Mary Lee, a music teacher in Garston, and eventually graduated with a Grade 1 Merit Primary RSA in pianoforte. This was July 1960. The sort of music which was popular in those days was Yellow Polka Dot Bikini, My Old Man's a Dustman by Lonnie Donegan, Living Doll by Cliff Richards. Also the hula hoop was the craze at that time. Cecil, the Sissy and the Air Pistol. Living not too far away from us in Coates Way was a boy who we nicknamed Cecil, a suitable name for a sissy. He was a cripple, in the sense that his feet were curved towards each other, and he walked awkwardly. He must have been about 10 years old. My brother poked fun at him, and I soon followed suit. We would sing about him a song called Sissel, Sissel, a Cecil Feet. He would try to avoid us. One day, Cecil came on his bike down to the woods, which we called the Dell. We were playing up the trees, and we had made a catapult out of one of the great big branches of the tree. One person would sit in the branch, and 2 or 3 other kids would pull on the rope till the branch was fully bent. The rope would be released, and the person would be catapulted up into the air. They would have to hold tight, otherwise they would end up in the trees. On this day, my brother had it in for Cecil. We took his bike and put it on the catapult, making sure it was catapulted up into the trees. We thought it was great fun, but Cecil didn't. His mother came to our house and complained to my mum about us bullying Cecil, but my mum seemed to have no mercy. She said Cecil's got to learn to look out for himself, that he was a sissy. I felt mum was wrong at that. I knew how bad we were, and my mum seemed to have no mercy. I felt bad, however, about that. Shortly after this incident, my brother encouraged me to take our newly acquired air pistols to school, pistols that we purchased without our mum and dad knowing, and Cecil was one of the boys that my brothers bullied and threatened to shoot in the playground. On reflection, my brother seemed to have no mercy at all. My brother must have been in the final year and I in the first year at Lee Farm Junior School. It wasn't long, however, before my air pistol was found and confiscated. After assembly, one of the boys had taken it out of my desk and was running around the classroom with it. Then the teacher walked in. I was in trouble again with the headmaster, and this would have been another time that I got the cane for bringing dangerous weapons to school. My mum and dad were always very good to us and would take us on holiday once a year. On one occasion, we went to Wrexham. Michael and I must have been about 7 or 10 years old. Mum and Dad had renovated an old Ford convertible car whose number plate was BBU with some number. Mum had bought the car whilst we were living in Oldham, and Dad was working in Watford. Dad had moved to Watford to get a job and was living with his mum, our grandma, at Ash Tree Road in Garston, Watford. Mum and Dad were able to buy a house, 149 Coachway, Garston, and it was Mum who decided to buy the car to get Michael and I down from Oldham to Watford. It was this car that I often fell out of when the brakes were hit. It caused me to move forward and push open the door lock, and the car door would open the opposite way round. I would end up in the road outside the car. Dad eventually was able to put a safety chain on the handle to stop this happening. Dad had rebuilt the engine and painted it black and green. Mum had made a new convertible top with her sewing skills. It was like Noddy's car. It was really good. It was in this car we went to Wrexham for a holiday, and it was there Mum and Dad bought Michael and I a fishing rod each. I had a wooden cane one, and he had a metal rod. I remember I was always jealous of what he had, as I always thought his things were better than mine. Keen to try out the rods, out near the sea harbour, Michael rushed to the waterside just around the corner and soon came back crying. He said a man had taken his rod and thrown it in the sea. Dad rushed round the corner, but no one was seen. We looked for the man on his bike, but no one was to be seen. It's only now that I look back that I believe Michael had quickly put the rod together, pretended to fish by casting an imaginary line, and the rod tip had gone straight into the sea. He probably felt he would be in trouble and be told off by Dad and be in trouble. So he invented a story about the man on the bike. When I look back, it is incidents like that I learned about the way my brother thought and worked, and later on in life it made me wonder at the tales he told.